All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today I have a guest who I've known for 23 years. We worked together when I started writing the Looking Glass Wars. His name is Ken Markman, and he's the managing partner and the CEO of KKM Global Brand Strategies. Basically, his job is brand strategy, marketing, corporate identities, licensing. Ken is also an aspiring writer. He's working on a very ambitious book, Brand Culture, which I think we really need. But one of my favorite quotes that he told me early on was, "He who tells the story rules the world," a Hopi Indian proverb. And the reason that I went to Ken was I wanted to understand how to build a franchise with my Looking Glass Wars story and how I might be able to own Alice in Wonderland in my slice of the Wonderland universe. So I am so delighted to have my longtime friend and collaborator, Ken Markman, on the show. Ken, welcome to All Things Alice.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, beautiful. Because we've known each other for so long, I was really appreciative and excited to have you on the show and to talk about your contribution to the vision that became the Looking Glass Wars franchise and brand. And because that's your expertise as the general manager and CEO of KKM Global Strategies. Now, KKM, I'm assuming, is the initials for your name.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
just so happy you didn't have a K for a last name.
Yes. Me too. I would have had to have rethought.
You would have had to rethought the title, and you're good with that because that's your job.
That's kind of what I do. I would have had to bill myself, which I can't afford. So,
and you've worked on some. I remember you worked on some big movies. You worked on Empire Strikes Back and Scarface, and you told me a couple of analogies or stories about Barbie when you worked at Mattel.
yes.
And so you have all sorts of wonderful stories, and you use these stories contextually to help me see a vision for the Looking Glass Wars. But I cannot remember how we met or who introduced us.
I think I may be able to put a breadcrumb on the water for you.
Okay, thank you.
Knowing you now as I do, you are nothing but thorough and intrepid. And in your course of due diligence, you had gotten to a point where I think you were thinking that you needed to begin to put a corral around this omnibus piece that was sprawling outward. And you wanted to be in the licensing business, as a lot of producers and IP owners did as well at the time. And in fact, around that period of time, I had been in very serious conversations with what was then the senior management of WME. And they were looking, as a result of Edward Scissorhand and several other filmmakers at the time, who were sort of turning pop culture storytelling into merchandise. And it was kind of the water cooler conversation at the grill to have, who's got your toy line? Oh, when is your T-shirt coming out?
Right.
Bragging rights, that kind of thing. It was no longer what Ferrari do you have, because nobody cared about that. They wanted to know who had your toy line. And so as a result of that, you had reached out to a colleague of mine at what was then called LIMA, the Licensing Industries Merchandising Association. And you had spoken to a gentleman, I believe his name was Marty Brockstein. And Marty was kind of the editor of all things Lima, going out to its constituency and its membership. And I think you were describing what you needed. You needed an entertainment guy, you needed a merchandising guy, you needed a marketing guy, all of that. And Marty was very, very kind to have volunteered my name. I don't know who else he may have recommended, but I was thrilled that he did. And I was even more thrilled that you picked up the phone and called. And I remember sitting in your tobacco leather chairs in your office.
I love those
And
chairs.
I love those chairs too. And I have been wanting to get a set. My brother in law has a beautiful pair, but he won't release them to me. But we sat there and I was completely mesmerized by the visual stimulus. That's a word that came out of Mattel. The visual stimulus is very often what we as the acquiring company would have to look at, and how potentially toyetic could it be. And some things you can play with. And one of the greatest questions when I was over at Universal and I was looking at a property called Casper the Ghost, I turned to Mark Taylor, who was my counterpart, head of development at Boys Toys at Mattel. And I said, we got to pick this up. This is great. It's omnipresent. It's in culture. Every kid has a ghost story, whatever. And he goes, Ken, how do you play ghost? And I couldn't answer the question. And so that was a telling tale of learning for me while at Mattel. And then when we talked, we saw all your card soldiers and Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter and the magic mushrooms. And it was a cornucopia of visual stimulus. You had spent an inordinate amount of time with an extraordinary artist whose name escapes me at the moment. But it reminded me of some of the graphics I had seen later on from Star Wars, from Lucas. And I immediately fell into this immersive embrace of Alice in Wonderland. And in so doing, I think what percolated immediately into our conversation was not how do we play Alice, but how does the story, your story of Alice, the card soldiers and the Mad Hatter, having seen this IP in the context of culture for several decades, including published works elsewhere and so on, and a rather unlimited list of animated and motion picture pieces nibbled at the DNA of Alice in Wonderland. How could you claim this as your own? Or was this just going to be another derivative story in a long merchandising tale? And it became incumbent upon me to want to reinvent your story so that you, Frank Beddor, the author, could take control of what had been a classic story owned by somebody else and perhaps even other filmmakers. And that story then became the backstory or the real story that was so compelling. And I know that when you told it at such meetings at William Morris and CAA and others, invariably somebody would lean over to me because I was sitting across from you and they'd say, Ken, is that true? And my response always was, if Frank said so, it has to be true. And so you became the legend, the mouthpiece and the face of a new brand story of a classic tale that had been mythologized and storied through folklore, which are the underpinnings of Joseph Campbell and the arc of the hero and everything else from which you've learned and have excelled at.
Well, all of the questions you had posed, I tried to answer. And back then, it's funny for me to think back to 2002 that I met you when my book didn't publish until 2004 in the UK and 2006. But back in 2000,
Thanks to Barbara Marshall,
Barbara Marshall, who you did
who,
introduce me to, and she was
who I
fantastic.
had known because I had been working on The Future is Wild with a documentarian from the UK.
And she wasn't a traditional agent, she was a book
No.
packager. So she knew all of the editors. I mean, she knew all of the publishers, not so much the editors. And so we went in and met all the different publishers. We took the approach that you do in the movie business. You go to the highest possible person and then trickle down. Turns out that in publishing, editors don't like that. Editors want to find the writers and then bring the writers to the publisher. So there was a bias against my book. And it wasn't until I went to Egmont where the publisher had just been given that job and she was the lead editor. And so she said, "You're going to be the last book I edit before I become the publisher." So the combination made it okay for her. Everybody else passed until I worked with Callie Poplack at Egmont and the book became successful. So that was an interesting twist on the business of publishing that I didn't realize until afterwards. And people told me, I said, "How come you passed on my book 4 times?" And they said the editors didn't like that I was handing you the manuscript down to them as if they had to take this on. So, but I want to go back to the point of our meeting in my office in Hollywood. And one of the things I had learned from working as a producer was the power of visuals, to your point, the visualization of the world. And so the artist you're speaking of is Doug Chang. He was he had worked on Star Wars, and I couldn't figure out in my mind how the card soldiers could unfold and march and be compact, and I just didn't see it. And so I asked him to do that sketch, and that was the first sketch I put on the wall. And I loved it so much that I asked him about who he worked with on his movies that did environments. And then I hired Brian Flora, who did The Valley of Mushrooms and The Chessboard Desert. And it became a little bit of an obsession for me to visualize the world while I was writing it as kind of a collaborative effort between artist and author. And then you came into the office, one of the first people that came in that was coming in from a business perspective. How do I build this out? But it was sort of audacious to think, well, I think I need some kind of branding, or I want to build a franchise. I knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't have anything ready yet. And your reaction to the world and to what was already created was really inspiring. And I thought, okay, I might have something here. And then you wrote your proposal, which started off with the perspective of branding, mythology, and pop culture. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then you wrote cultural myth, storytelling, and the reoccurring themes bond culture. So I was like, okay, what is he talking about? And then, you start.
My wife is still asking me that same question.
And then you said the multi-generational social condition is called the cultural evolution theory, which I would like you to explain to our listeners what your job is when it comes to branding stories in culture and trying to kind of catch the zeitgeist of what's going on and make it your own. Because basically that's what you were telling me to do. And I thought, how does that work? Well, give me some example.
You're quoting some phraseology, which are the cornerstones of a book I have long tried to write, which I've shared in bits and pieces with you over these many, many, many years. And it's called Brand Culture. And it comes up from the multidisciplines of my career, which are marketing, media, communication, corporate identity, design,
licensing.
And licensing. And I just happen to be on the cusp of this epoch of a culture right now, which we are living in, thanks to the movie industry and other media that had preceded it, where we're kind of losing words, where once they were the poetic juice of a culture. And right now we're living in an experiential culture. which is experienced visually. It's no wonder that social media has captured the next generation, X, Z, Alpha, whatever it happens to be. And so, as a result of having been in the movie industry for all these years, I'd always taken the tact, and I was often asked by my students at UCLA, how'd you get into the business? And I said, I love design and I love the expression of storytelling. If I could be in a business painting on the largest canvas in the world of putting words and pictures together, interestingly enough, automatic pictures, putting those two concepts together and make a living doing it, I will be very grateful. And that's what I did. So, as an English major on one side and a graphic design wannabe on the other, it was just natural that logos, iconography, typefaces, messaging, hidden or overt, would become part of what I wanted to express in a brand. Along comes a gentleman from Sarah Lawrence named Joseph Campbell. Many people who may be listening to this have read his books. The Hero Has 1,000 Faces, et cetera, et cetera. And if they haven't, they ought to just pick it up or Google it and spend an hour and just drill through some of his things. There's a wonderful book, A World of Ideas, authored by Bill Moyers of PBS, where he interviews Joseph Campbell. And he gets right into the arc of the storytelling and arc of the hero. These stories are born, that are hardwired into our culture, are expressed and handed down, interestingly enough, as memes, not the memes that we think of in the 21st century today and are often thought of as a hack, but memes that are passed on from one person to the next as they were religiously. So the church was the biggest organization of theater 1,500, 2,000 years ago. The equivalent of that theater today is no longer the Orpheum in Manhattan, nor is it Radio City, where it once was maybe in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Now it's the fandom that happens at a football stadium,
Right.
a baseball stadium, where the collective catharsis of that experience handed down. Oh, do you remember last year it was 4th and 3?
Mm-hmm.
And they remember it religiously, and it gets passed down. And the folklore is it goes from father to son, blah, 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 all the way through. And we rode that wave through Hot Wheels, interestingly enough, because I was at Mattel during the 25th year. And it was just at that time where dads were beginning to have sons.
Mm.
And just like my son-in-law is having a son or had 2 sons, and my 2 young grandboys, who are 5 and 3 as I speak, have now inherited my set of 50 Hot Wheels that I collected, and they've all been passed on.
Nice.
So what I'm saying is the memes are stories. They begin as folklore and they're passed on as experiences. Some of them are wildly exaggerated. Some of them are very explicit. And at the root of all of this becomes folklore, becomes a mythology that gets passed on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then if it's connected to iconography, whether it's a signature or a voice, a dance, a sound, a musicianship, that then gets placed against frames, 24 frames a second, and turns into a motion picture or a theatrical play. This is what we're dealing with today. The experience economy is the expression of story. And one of the things we learn through human psychology and the study of it is that people don't remember facts. If I gibberished to your audience today and said, well, 73% of albinos are never reached the age of 50, it's going to go right over their head. If I said to them, have you ever seen an albino cat land on their feet from 30 feet falling off a roof? Try to visualize that.
Right.
They're going to go, that guy was talking about an albino cat.
Right.
They'll remember that.
Right.
They'll remember the story. They're not going to remember the fact. And so the very beginning of mythology and meme storytelling, which becomes legend and then expressed and changed over time and modernized through technology and media, is the art of storytelling. And that's where you began with one of the great stories of all time. And one of the things about, I just want to amplify about branding, is that you begin with the story, and we wanted you to own your story. We wanted to carve it out as unique and separate. And so this happens whether it's BMW or it happens to be Coca-Cola or it's Nike, just do it. And so if you and I were in Atlanta sipping a Coca-Cola in their corporate headquarters and we said, wow, that was a great meeting with the management at Coca-Cola, wasn't it, Frank? I said, man, they got it right away. And if we went back and did a post-mortem and we asked Coca-Cola, they'd say, well, was it the meeting that was so good? Was it Frank's presentation? Or was it the Coke that we shared in the board? Because we enjoy Coke and Coke is life. And so that's how ingrained it has become over the last 120 years. Advertising helps that to a great degree with BMW. BMW, the ultimate driving machine. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
It's
And
perfect.
and it's brilliant. And there's another axiom that falls into branding, and that is, and we talked about this early on. In order to own a brand, you want to be able to own a slice of the consumer's mind.
Mm-hmm.
You want to own a word, you want to own a phrase, you want to own a color in their mind. Red indelibly, boom, Coca-Cola, right? Nike and the swoosh. It's simple, it's straightforward, it gets right to you. So when you think about BMW, you go, the ultimate driving machine. God, it couldn't be any better than that. And the axiom here is you want to take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. And that's what BMW did. It's an automobile,
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks. It's coffee, man. It used to be 25 cents. Now it's $25.
Right.
I don't know. I don't go there. I can't afford it. But the reality is they've taken the ordinary and turned it into the extraordinary. And that's what branding is all about, so that you can take that experience and own it.
And you tasked me with that when you simply said you should come up with a different spelling or for the name Alice, so you can own Alice. And that was the moment that I started thinking, broadening out from the names that Lewis Carroll and had made and Disney had made familiar. So I changed the spelling of Alice. Instead of the Mad Hatter, he became Hatter Madigan. And another thing that you did that was also very, very helpful is you were posing this question of, and and it's from your English background, about how do we suspend disbelief in this world that in this reality of a fantasy world. And because the Looking Glass Wars was set both in Wonderland and Victorian England, that gave me a little bit of balance. But I also was mindful of creating a Wonderland that people could suspend their disbelief. And that was something that you kept saying. We need to be able to suspend disbelief so we can land and live. And as if like Jurassic Park is actually in Hawaii, or the Looking Glass or Wonderland is just up the 5. If you drive long enough, you'll find yourself in Wonderland.
Exactly. And the how could you refute the simplicity of the idea that in a grain of brown there was a bug that was from a prehistoric animal? And only Michael Crichton, with his scientific background, he created the myth,
Right.
and he turned it into a story that almost became, I mean, it becomes irrefutable. I mean, it's so believable that how could you not want to believe it? And that's where metaphors and storytelling become this immersive fabric. in the consumer's mind. And that's how we started our story. That there's enough believability in the past to shape, shift, to use one of your words, shape shift some of this so that you can take ownership of it.
And you did write that in terms of, you know, people love stories that are familiar, told in unfamiliar ways. And you wrote a new reality for a new generation, borrowing from the past and making them their own, a form of branded history with its own images indelibly marked in the minds of a new global audience. So I tried to, put that into you know, a less professor kind of. But
I can't get away from myself, Frank.
yes, you are. But yes, that whole idea of creating a new reality, really telling a story in a different way, but taking ownership of it. I found when I started to go out into the marketplace with my book, you know, that was happening. People were feeling grounded in the world and the story, because the premise of Lewis Carroll getting it wrong was it was easy enough to go, oh, let me just turn my perspective on history and what I think I know. And then the other thing that was really important is you said you have to change their perception of what they think Wonderland is right off the bat. And that's when you have to have the meta story, the story behind the story. And so suddenly I had more work to do.
I remember that.
And
Yeah, no, it's really true. There's a couple of axioms that have always found their way into my thought process when working on a movie or any branding objective. Is you do want to suspend disbelief, which is what entertainment and storytelling does. It magnifies it, and if you can find the universal truth in a message that is not so far out of reach that you cannot not believe it, that it's just beyond my grasp of reality as I know it. And by penetrating your world, you're going to show me how I can conclude that reach. So to get back to Coca-Cola for a moment, if again you ask Coca-Cola, we're in the liquid business, whether it's water, juices, whatever, they want to be the refreshing drink, no matter what you covet or favor. At the end of your reach, they want their product, their brand to be at the end of your reach, no matter whether you're at home, the movie theater, baseball stadium, or whatever have you. And a great storyteller and filmmaker does just that. You suspend just belief, you almost can break through the fourth wall, but by sliding into that world, you will take me magically to a place heretofore I've never been permitted to go. And so you become my guide, my Sherpa. And through your storytelling, you're telling me how to survive, how to succeed. And that leads me to the universality of it. I was making a presentation to a number of licensees in Los Angeles and California. I was working on a show when I was at MTM, and it was a show called The Blanket Show. And there was sort of this Rastafarian character who was like an Alistair Cook on PBS. And this little Rastafarian sheep would sit down and unfold a blanket that looked like a book, and he would invite all the animals in the woods to sit around, and he was going to tell a story. The stories that were in the blanket show were musical and so on, and was basically a practice and a runway for parents through separation anxiety to be able to help their little ones get off to sleep. At the time in the industry, you had to have 22 or 28 half hours to be able to syndicate something so that the repetitive nature of viewership would incline a purchase decision for merchandise. And I decided I can't do that, because our Bill Melendez, who had done famously Peanuts was our illustrator. We couldn't afford to do 22 or 28 half hours with Bill. So we decided to do one, but the one was going to be the reprise and the kickoff every night for the blanket show at home. And so we started off with the Rastafari, we're jamming, and the kids would be dancing, putting their jammies on. And okay, what are we doing now, boys? Well, we're going to go brush our teeth and comb our hair. Okay, great. And then we're going to put the music on. And then mom's going to come in and read the book. And then dad's going to shut off the light. And so my pitch to the licensees was, would you like, here's the universal truth, would you like to be in a business that happens in every household in the world every night? Would that be a business
I think
worth
that's a
your
big
time?
business.
Or you could take a risk and hope that Batman 47 is going to be as successful as the first two or three. No, I'd like to be in the nighttime business. So we basically said, let's be in the go to bed business. And so the book was born, the night lights were created, the music was created. We had everyone from Rosemary Clooney up and down the ladder singing nighttime songs to help the separation. And the universal truth was irrefutable. You don't want to be in a business that happens in every household around the world at least once a day.
Right.
So that became, and we had 35 licensees signed by the end of our first 6 months based on one half hour.
Wow. Wow. That's
And
very
it was
impressive.
unheard of in the business, absolutely breakthrough in the business. And so for filmmakers like you, something that's irrefutable, the first question I invariably ask you is, why do you want to tell this story? It's the same story, whether you're talking to Alan Pakula or Steven Spielberg, both of whom I had the highest regard for when I worked with them. And invariably, what's the story you want to tell? And then I get into that conversation with them and I say, what's the promise and what's the takeaway? And it becomes real simple. So the promise, okay, I get it. It may be a little abstract if you ask Christopher Nolan what his promise was on his many movies. It would probably be a very esoteric and dense response, but nonetheless, very curated. I then say, what's the takeaway? And I put it down to this. Your audience just saw your movie in a theater. As they're leaving the theater, as they're walking out in the theater, and the light and the smell of popcorn is going to hit them in the head, what is the thing that they're going to say to their significant other or partner that they just shared an experience with? What is that football guy going to tell his son? What's that boy going to tell his dad that he just saw in the Viking game as a fan? What's the fandom response? That's the takeaway. So now that's your job as a filmmaker. What do I want them to say? And how does that correlate with the promise I'm going to give to them so that they can enter the sphere of my chapel, my theater of communication? And over the next hour and a half, take them on the ride of their life, whether it's at a theme park, in a church, in a synagogue, in a baseball stadium, or other.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And your job then becomes, what's the takeaway?
And I remember you posing that question, and it was very challenging, to reduce it to something that was personal. And that was another aspect of us working together where I started thinking about, the power of imagination and the power of getting back to the inner child in you where wonder and curiosity and anything is possible. And I thought, okay, I'm writing this book because of that. And so the idea that, and then I remember you talking, how do you play imagination? which was another when it came to the toys, and we were talking
Right.
about.
Very ethereal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So then it was okay. Then it became about sort of good and evil and Joseph Campbell stuff, and so then you're kind of pivoting to what kind of mythology am I creating? What myth do I want people to walk away with that's different than good and bad and good and evil. And now in this culture, as I think about what I'm working on, I think about what's real. Like,
Mm,
is this real or is it not real? And
that's great.
that's powerful with Alice because people tell her her backstory is not real, and she loses her, her belief in her fact, her biographer, her life. And I think the world is so divisive right now, and facts are no longer facts. That I thought, oh, that's a
Thanks, Rudy.
yeah, that's a really powerful, idea that people want to get to understand that this is real, and this is I can hold on to this, and it's not going to be pulled away from me. So
And that reinforces, Frank, I think that reinforces the etymology of it truly reinforces looking glass, looking through the looking glass. At what end of that am I seeing reality? Is it closer to me or further away? Is it giving me the right optics? So on and so forth. So there's a subliminal messaging in that statement that you could run and almost code the brain to be able to say, okay, I'm looking through this lens. Which medium am I experiencing today? What's truth? What's not truth? And if I'm sitting in a football stadium, to go back to that, I'm sitting with 100,000 people that believe in the same thing I do. The fandom of the exalted play, whatever it happens to be. We're going to be warriors and win this year's season. I mean, this cathartic experience economy is not new. It has lived for over 3,000 years and longer. It's tribal. It's part of our DNA. We're hardwired to it. It's just that it has evolved as technology has evolved, as we have evolved ourselves, as we need stories to survive.
When you were asking me about how do you play imagination, I remember you went to Barbie and the playability of Barbie and how Barbie evolved. And as I remember, you were talking about the 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 different ways you could manipulate the clothing and then having different kinds of Barbies. And
Yeah.
I remember that being, I don't remember the details, but to your point, I don't remember the facts about like what, but I do remember that it was about the playability and how successful Barbie had been. And then it tapered off and then they had to reimagine it. And now with the movie coming out, it must have come full circle or have a whole new
A whole new
iteration.
generation.
Generation, okay.
And Barbie is a portal. She's like a magic wand. I mean, you can cut her hair, and all the girls do. My daughter did. They can dress her. And once they take off her clothes, it's impossible to get back on. So you have a use up rate, as we used to call it in the cosmetic business. What's the use up rate for the, I don't know, moisturizing of your skin? How many applications can we go? Well, 20. Okay. But if it starts to get crusty and dry, we're going to throw it out and you're going to try something new. Barbie has a usability rate, and the objective was to go from not how long does a girl play with Barbie. It used to be from the ages of 2 to 11, but that has diminished greatly. 11-year-old girls are gamers now. They're
Yeah,
not.
no
They
chance.
don't play with dolls anymore.
No.
So the compression of age the compression of age and the acceleration of adulthood for young kids has exponentially grown. But what has also grown is the number of Barbies. So if you want to be Barbie astronaut, Barbie policeman, Barbie fireman, Barbie whatever, she's the portal for play.
Mm.
And the costume, just like the characters in any one of your stories, have costumes, they have hair play, whatever, whatever, whatever. And that all enhances it. And then if you have Barbie's house and you have Barbie's car, and then you got Barbie's friends and Midge and this and that and whatever. I wanted to stop on, I didn't want to stop. I wanted to give an homage for a bit to Hot Wheels. And knowing that you have little babes in your family now,
Hmm.
and I as well, and I alluded to it before. If you look at a little boy's hand, have you ever noticed that the size of a Hot Wheels car is just about perfectly the width of a grip of a little boy's hand?
I did not.
And you'd go, well, wow, fast cars, track, cars, whatever. Do you know that General Motors and all the cars, whether it's Ferrari, doesn't make any difference? They all give Mattel a royalty-free agreement, which means that if you want to do Jeeps, you want to do
Hmm.
Corvettes, royalty-free. Why? Because that's the next generation.
Oh, yeah, that.
I'm playing with the Ferrari, Dad. Look at me. And it goes loop-de-loop. And when your big sister, who's only 2 years older than you, or your big brother, in the case of my family, he's only 2 years older, he's telling me what he can play with and what he can't play with. And my mom's telling me what to do. And my dad's saying the same thing. And my grandmother, I have no control over anything. I can cry, I can scream, I can run, but I have no control over anything. But I have control over these big machines that make loud noises and grumble. And so I believe to this day, the workhorses, as they're called, which are the road graders and
Hmm.
dump trucks and
Yep.
whatever, in a little boy's collection of Hot Wheels, those are still the mainstay because they make gnarly sounds, which I can mimic, and I can have control over this big, powerful thing because my dad takes me down the street where they're doing some construction, those tires are like going to the trees.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I can control this. So the sense of empowerment for girls, it's this wonderment of imagination, and for little boys, it's empowerment. And that's what it's all about. And that's how toys work.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. That car manufacturers, of course, because eventually I'm going to buy that Corvette that I had.
Of course.
I had a Corvette, Hot Wheels, and I loved Hot Wheels. So that's a great story. But I also wanted to go back to the Jurassic Park story because Michael Crichton came up with that amazing premise, but Universal and Steven Spielberg, they took ownership of dinosaurs to the point that nobody is ever going to take dinosaurs back. Do you agree with that?
100%. They own dinosaurs. And when I was at Mattel, I was in several meetings with the boys' toy designers and our president of Boys Toys. And we were looking at this secret property from Stephen, went over to his house, over to Amblin's offices on the back lot. And the problem that we were having at the time was we wanted to encourage Stephen to do some color configuration so that the dinosaurs could be branded. And what that means is when Mattel did Mermaid Barbie, people like Chaim Saban, I'm not throwing bad comments at, he would go out and do a slightly smaller version of a mermaid and dump it into the Targets of the world and whatever, and it would be in a bin. Meanwhile, we would be selling Barbie for, take a number, $12, whatever. He was selling his in a rounder bin near the checkout line for $4. So we were being cannibalized. So mermaids, ever present, dinosaurs, puppies, dogs, all generic. But if you can own it, and Stephen looked like he was by sheer dint of force of the popularity and the size and the sound of his dinosaurs and the maturation of his technology, which he fused into his filmmaking brilliantly. We wanted a color distinction. And I remember being in the meeting, going around with all the engineers, the boys, the toy design guys, must have been in a boardroom of 25 people. And they convinced me that we would not be able to go beyond being recognized beyond a generic toy or a generic dinosaur. And therefore, we were afraid that we would be cannibalized and our investment in the toy line would never pay off. Hasbro, smartly so, and Jim Black and the management at the time of Hasbro picked it up and made gazillions of dollars. That was sheer dint of power to Steven Spielberg storytelling, the sound, the sensation, the rapture, no literal and pun intended, but the rapture of that story was incredible. I'm sorry that mistake, I can't give myself credit for having passed on one of the great properties of all time. But you to your point, you want to own a character. You want to own everything about that and close it off so that nobody can cannibalize you up and down the toy line by size, material, or channel of distribution.
Right, right. Yeah, those were some of the key points you told me early on about that. Listen, let me ask you, because this is a All Things Alice podcast, and I'm wondering, you're a literary man. What what do you think, or what do you think the reasons are that Alice in Wonderland has lasted for so long in culture, but hasn't been centralized in the way that Jurassic Park and centralized dinosaurs?
You can't deny that the story is ever present in culture. I think that you have made it more accessible across media, which is what's necessary, as opposed to being a classic novel from an English writer, yada yada yada, steeped in a period of time that is bygone era. But what I guess your point is, in the word, she has captured the imagination of adults and young children. If we can remember going back and being, what's real? Is it under my bed? Is it in my closet? I mean, I remember still as a boy running into my bedroom at my mom and dad's house and leaping into bed because I was frightened. First of all, it was a kind of a cool thing to be flying a little bit, but I was scared to death that something, God knows what, the dust bunnies or whatever, were going to grab my ankle and pull me into the netherworld.
Mm-hmm.
Did I believe in ghosts? Not really, but I was afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I was afraid. So there are, the sun goes down, gets dark. Pretty soon it'll be 4:30 in the afternoon. It's nighttime here, in LA. So I think Alice has the potential of wonder, fulfillment, of tripping the light fantastic of what is real and what is not, what is make believe or not. Where does our imagination begin or end? And I think that is very tribal. Watching the flicker flame of a fire in a cave and acting out the hunt of the day and the warriorship that gets built around that and the coming of age. These are truth serums that flow through our bloodstream. And so, yes, I think that is what has made it last for so long. It is a classic tale. We really don't know whether there were or weren't dinosaurs. How do we know there's not a conspiracy of a bunch of people throwing bones around the world? Who knows? I mean, everything now is conspiracy. But the wonder of it is that Stephen created a world of imagination
Mm-hmm.
that we could, it was just beyond belief. None of us were here, but there's enough factual information, just like in your backstory, just about enough factual information that there is a realm of imagination. And if there isn't, we'd like to have one anyway.
Yes, so
That's what
true.
it is.
What
That's what it is.
what was your first introduction to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland? Did you read the book? Did you see the movie?
Not the movie, Frank. I think it was storytelling and reading of the book, not watching the movie. And because I had, a sort of a literary bent, and I always have had. And whether it was Charles Dickens or it was Edgar Allan Poe or whatever of the period, I was kind of drawn to that period of dark things and strange things, and who knows that there was or wasn't Jack the Ripper, and maybe there was, and maybe there's not, and who knows. But I was always drawn to that sort of netherworld, what's in the shadows. And she kind of represented that to me as a boy reading that. It wasn't the girl. I didn't identify with the girls, whatever, but I did identify with this unknown
Yeah, no.
of unknown possibilities.
What's under the bed?
What's under the bed? And there were several toy lines that I reviewed that were everything from dust bunnies to what's under the bed, this mythology of who's in the shadows. I mean, it plays to our deepest fears and our grandest imaginations, and we're hardwired to it.
I don't. This is a part of entertainment and culture that people don't really understand, and you've done a really beautiful job of articulating and the two aspects of your interest in life. Literature and art, and I can only encourage you, for all of us listening and out in the world, to finish that damn book of yours. Where
That
are you on this book? You've been talking about it, but
I have been talking about it relentlessly, and and just when I don't think I have anything to say about something that supercharges my jets, a conversation with somebody such as you ignites that fuse. And I know there's something, I know there's there. And I know that storytelling and myth is part of our culture currently and has been, as it has made modern life for the last 3 or 5 thousand years what we have come to know it. And I'd like to just comment on it, kind of put a rationale as to why people react a certain way, little boys to those road graders and so on and so forth, because I lived it. I've seen it and I know it. And I know it to be that is the truth. And and that's why Alice is a perennial. She's not going away. It's beautiful. And you will own imagination, however you wish to define it, by color, by shape, by sound, by musical note, soon to be, um, and and through your literary prowess, you will be able to turn these cards over like your tarot cards for the public to be able to penetrate the world of imagination as you want people to see it, because they may not recognize it by themselves. So you are our Sherpa. You are our wise man at the fire telling us the story of Alice. And that's the takeaway.
well, we need your book. We need your book so all of the storytellers can have their roadmap and the breadcrumbs. We can leave the breadcrumbs behind for our audience. And I think the thing that was really enlightening about the conversation and talking to you about this, especially for the public, is that the storytelling and the way that you contextualize your experiences and contextualize how other artists have taken their ideas and brought them into pop culture And going all the way back to your story about, being in a cave and telling the story of the day of the hunt and creating the mythology, all of that is really a powerful roadmap for creators to find something creative and that they can own in their own story. It doesn't have to be a franchise of on the,
Right.
but it just needs to be, you want to express your truth, and that comes through the writing and the process. And I think that's what you help me to clarify and to make strong choices because you asked strong questions.
Mm. Tell me, Frank, if you can, give us a pre-teaser. Um, Fragrance is one of the most powerful branding tools in the quiver, because of where the brain senses smell. It's in the center of the brain. There's a particular part of it, but it's very, very powerful. And so is music. And you seem to be on the cusp of something rather extraordinary, because you could own a sound just like Mission Impossible. It doesn't have to be an entire orchestra, it could be three notes, whatever. Are you hoping that your music will be able to bring a new audience to your franchise and to the storytelling of imagination? I can't help but say, "Oh, I wish I could have front row seats. I can't wait. I want to be humming the song." By the way, Sammy Khan was one of my favorite quotes. He was once asked, "What is one of the happiest things as a songwriter? What is one of the happiest things that could happen to you?" He said, "When I'm walking down Fifth Avenue and somebody is whistling one of my tunes." And so I share that with you because you're not too far away from it, my friend. So
Well, my,
what's next?
Well, I'll tell you, but I'm going to answer the question that about this whistling song because my fantasy was that somebody would dress up as one of my characters for Halloween. And at the time when I was first writing my book, I didn't realize what a broad world cosplay was. And
Oh,
so
beautiful. Yeah.
when I went to Comic-Con and people showed up in costumes, and it was based on my book, not a movie or a TV show, that was a highlight. But to answer your question, which is timely because today I received the first video of my composer, lyricist, and book writer, and they sang a little song to me saying, "We're starting. We're not sure
Oh,
it's going to be good, but we're starting." And so the process of the Looking Glass Wars musical has begun officially today.
wow. Bravo. Oh, congratulations. Whew.
So fingers crossed. As you know, I've been thinking about this from the first moment you and I had spoken because I was friends with Gregory Maguire, and in 2002, the year that we met, I believe, maybe it was 2001, Wicked debuted in San Francisco.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure it could have been Seattle. But anyway, I went up and saw the show and thought, oh, I wonder if I could do that with my book. And so
Oh,
I've been thinking about it for 25 years, and here we are starting.
here we
So,
are.
yeah.
Yeah, I was working on Curious George with Universal, and for a couple of years, and the next up on their hit list that they wanted me to undertake was Wicked. And and I never, there was a management change and NBC spun off and yada yada. So the rest is history, as is often the case in Hollywood. But I would have loved to have gotten my hands around that. It would. I'm sure that the people who are there now, and I know many of them still, are having the time of their life.
Well, my understanding is that Wicked was not even on their books. It was a miscellaneous item.
Hmm.
because originally it was developed as a movie. They couldn't make it as a movie, and then they made it as this musical. And Universal had some interest in it, but they go, okay, go make the musical. And so now, obviously, many years later, one of the most successful of all time, and apparently the movie is quite good. Reports that I have heard, so I'm excited. I'm excited to see it, and maybe it'll rub off on folks thinking that
Sure.
the Looking Glass Wars, Alice in Wonderland could be the next
Yeah,
tale in
that's all right. We
culture.
don't have to own the genre. We just
No.
want to participate.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us on the show
Oh,
today and sharing
it's
your
such a
wonderful
pleasure.
stories. And most importantly, that your contribution to my work that you initiated and that you so kindly imparted in 2002 and continued on through all these years has really helped me to create what I've created to date. So thank you, Ken.
That warms my heart. That has the most meaning. H.L. Mencken, the journalist, was once asked. I leave you with this thought. Was once asked, "Why do you write?" And he said, "Well, I write first to make a living, and secondly, and more importantly, to win the respect of those I respect." And so your comments are very dear and important to me. Thank you so much. Love the participation. We'll come back in a nano and you don't have to ask more than once.
Thank you so much, Ken. We'll talk
Have a good
soon.
afternoon.
All
Thank
right.
you so
All right.
much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.